Stay the fourth, round the
They're trying to do the email thing, they don't know how to eat.
Have some fun, debate smart.
Oh, we're too slow.
It is now 2 minutes past when the round should have started.
I already
3
know.
minutes.
I promise.
We got one AC standing up and ready to go?
I'm gonna start once they have it.
Cool. We ready?
Yes, we are good.
Good answer. Have some fun, folks.
Thank you. Alright, judges. Towson. Cool.
The abstract machine of faciality continually threatens to reduce identity to dyads, either an antagonistic position towards structures of oppression and other individuals surrounding us, or the reinvocation of static ossified categories. The topic invites both a historical self-reflexive examination of the diverse modalities of oppression and the simultaneous affirmation of becoming. The modern prostitution regime gained power from the image of seductive Asian man threatening the purity of white European womanhood, while at the same time inviting the immigration of large numbers of Chinese women so long as they remain prostitutes. Weed restrictions drew upon the rhetorical economy of the Chinese opium scare, but combined this with a new xenophobia framed around a Mexican invasion, creating new regimes of violence. Those regimes enrolled tropes of black danger to become a crucial element of the present carceral regime. Militarism expands through the fears of the rise of China. These contingent historical moments become sedimented through repetitions and reaffirmations employed against other groups, Black American, Southeast Asian migrants in novel ways. Michael's family immigrated to the United States from China, and he's marked in the American racial code as foreign and other. Within the dominant regimes of raciality, he's still, so they say, doing quite well. The long history of racial and sexual oppression in America makes it obvious this isn't true. Brutal disposability of Chinese workers, Chinese exclusion, in the murder of Vincent Chin, the myth of the model minority coexist with the bound suspicion of Asian otherness. Faciality operates by defining positions in terms of their deviance from the white heterosexual male standard. This process of demarcation is the condition of possibility for identitarian violence. So down in 7. My disagreement is not with the insistence on the embodiment of emotion, but the reliance on notion recognition to explain the encounter. They tend to treat white, non-white devotes as diet, naturally poses little than attention paid to the complicated process where racial formation become dominant. Faciality is not based on interjected dialects, large world historical scope, and abstract machine of faciality ranges bodies in relation to power. Faciality constantly invents new faces, capture deviant bodies, multiplying opposite positions. Far beyond the binaries, there are thousands of encounters. Faciality is imperialism, rose with Christianity. Faciality become a matter from pure racialization of the face of the ordinary white man. The first deviances are racial. The all man, black man, they are inscribed in the white wall of signification, distributed with the black hole subjectivity. European racism, the white man's pen is never operated by exclusion. Racism operates by determination degrees of deviance, which endeavors to integrate non-conforming traits into increasingly eccentric and backwards ways, sometimes tolerating, sometimes erasing them. From the viewpoint of racism, there's no exterior. The faciality machine places all bodies in relation to the standard, measuring their acceptability through increasingly meticulous science. To understand the intricate hierarchies of racism, referring to the last of the gradual multidimensional deviance is a preferable dialectical model. Faciality also explains why neo-colonialism, therefore scarcely left-lighted place by the dark others, everyone with facialized Euro-American ways of life continue to spread. White man remains the global standard. What this kind of racism has in common with Phanonians, whiteness is a norm where difference of the deviance is based not on the lack of recognition, negation, or annihilation of the other, than subtle, machinic differentiations and territorialization. The virtual structure behind racial formation don't look like a formal logic, but not a racism can be countered with Hegelian sublimation to the universal. You should vote affirmative to activate this space as a site of becoming. The regime of faciality maintains its position via the construction of synthetic oppositions between staticized identity groups. Against this, we must intensify the production of difference by growing grass. Growing grass means affirming the multiplicity of identity. Identity should become multiple, where the trees of identitarian totality once stood, thousands of molecular identities should sprout. So down in 6. Every time phenotype makes another machinic connection, there's a stutter. Every time bodies are further intense in segregation, however brittle, there needs to be an affective investment. This is the ruptural moment in which to intervene. Race should not be eliminated but proliferated. What is needed is an affirmation of racist creativity, virtuality can be wild, far from equilibrium, liberatory. It's not that everyone becomes completely brown, it's just the white supremacists become strenuous. As many populations start harboring similar economic, technological, cultural productivities, ways dealing with all sorts of bodies with all sorts of wealth. There's no race but inferior minoritarian. There's no dominant race. The molecularization of race would consist in breaking up into 1,000 tiny races. Machinism against racism built upon the gradual fragmented corporeal difference that extends further than the street. Understand the geographical differentials between a Jew and a black soldier, between a woman in the South and a woman in Wall Street. May seem that machinism is utopian, but it's empirical, imminent, pragmatic, cultural studies preoccupation with apology, recognition, politically correct language, reconciliation to understand the way of really doing something. Essence comes politics. Politics starts with convincing people of race and materiality. Process such as race fluid cannot be studied with classical notions of identity, causality, cogito, representation, reducibility. Race requires a theory to be understood. More critical dialogue facilitated by the non-binary ontology of complexity theory. The molecular energy of race can be sensed, understood, and harnessed to crumble systemic bonds currently, keeping bodies in place, hoping for 1,000 tiny races, not annihilating nature from culture, but immersing oneself in nature's lines of flight. Understand what race is, know its potentiality, try to sense them, hiding around you and find out what is keeping them from becoming actual. Now, why should you affirm? Because critique and negativity are not the same thing. Melancholia and mourning have become hallmarks of our context. The result of critiques of domination have stalled. Affirmation is the only way out of a stifling paradox between negativity as critique and activating affect as a modality for change. Right out of 9. The paradox is how to engage to affirmative politics which entails the production of social rights and the hope while doing critical theory, which means resisting the present. Central to this debate is how to resist the present nasty and responsible period of the time so as to engage in oppositional and affirmative manner. The biopolitical concerns that fuel our necropolitan warfare also induce political economy and negative factors. Conceptual case for affirmation resist the rest of the rejection of the traditional equation and political subjectivity. Critical conscience, there's an implicit assumption of political subjectivity about resistance. That resistance means the negation of the negativity of the present. Something against implies a belligerent activation. Paradoxical concomitance is positivity that which one rejects the discourse. Practical critical philosophy result in establishing negativity is a paradox of moment of conscience raising crucial to overcoming the negative consistency. This result in simplistic equation being critique critique, and negativity in the reduction of logic, negation of subject, ethical cores, process, endangering, empowered modes, becoming work critiques was not assumed is for overturning of negativity necessarily available, moving beyond dialectical thought, means evading oppositional scheming, think to create new concepts, disengage the subject forms of negativity attached to the affirmative others. Every event contains within the possible potential for being overcome and overtaken as negative its negative charge can be transposed, affirmative ethics pushed back into the motion, into emotion, the act back into actions, introducing movement process, and becoming negative passions to merely destroy the self with a harmless capacity to relate to other negative affect, diminishes our capacity to interdependence. That's key to both the non-unitary vision of the subject into affirmative ethics. This should neither be encouraged nor rewarded for lingering around too long and productive. Produce a number of significant shifts from negative to affirmative ethics, from introverted generative desire from constitutive outsides to geometry of the affect requires mutual actualization from male impulsion to open-ended web-like subject. Now, rather than viewing our affirmation as the inscription, Michael's scholarship into my wide white world, the production and performance of the one you see juxtaposed are hybridizing cis-male positionalities in the academic class privilege, and ask about the possibilities that this generates. This generative politics is the politics of becoming, a simultaneous recognition of the constitutive exclusion in our public acts and attentiveness to that very same. If there's any value in debate to begin with, it must start from the presupposition of non-exclusion, right out in 6. People have been confronted by the irreparable, insurmountable, traumatic, and instrumental that will do anything to find solve and compensation. The yearning for solves to justice, commercially exploited kind of vulnerability human beings experience in the face of such events as high scale of high horrors and for which no adequate compensation even thinkable. There's an incommensurability between the suffering involved for which no measure of compensation is possible. The wound beyond repair, the notion of justice, in the sense of logical rights and reparations is not applicable. Ethics consistent accepting the impossibility of adequate compensation lived with the open wound is favored of public morality based on principles claim and compensation. The financial substance could be right no answer to the injury, the ethics of affirmations about the 70 claims for both claims for the question about claims of compensation, resisting logical retribution rights, and taking different right activities and force that aims at fulfilling subject capacity of interaction, freedom is joyful, pleasure prone, ethical behavior is the enhanced subject potential capacity to experience through freedom. The positivity of this desire to express one's innermost and constitutional freedom, affirmation, not naive optimism, sort of turning the tide of negativity to transform the process of achieving freedom through the awareness of our limits. Ethics means faithfulness. 2. The desire to become this introduced in temporal dimension discussion leads to very conditions possibility for the future for an ethics of sustainability and for expression of positive affects. Makes the subject class the kind of ethics address the affects of structural pain, but does not locate the ethical in this instance in it, but be with a compassionate witnessing our empathic co-presence. Ethics is essential. What about transformation, negative and positive path and affirmative, and pneumatic ethics but puts the motion back into emotion, the act back into actions. When negative by negative affects is blockage, rignification, negative passage diminish. The light of reliance on others when negated by the negative passions, the power of the life itself is dynamic force, vital flows becomes. This is why we should not be encouraged. Be reward for lingering around too long. Resentment into affirmations, gesture of affirmation, moving beyond the still defying effects of pain, the injustice, a gesture of displacement from her, which fully contradicts twin lines of claims to compensation, depersonalization, the one bed, which is the ultimate ethical challenge, but reason has nothing to do with those precise points, not fatalism, even less recognition, but rather no more fati ethics consists in reworking these events in the direction of positive relations, as it is not carelessness or lack of compassion, but a reform of lucidity, the knowledge and possibility of finding adequate answers to the question about source, the cause of the ill fate, the painful event, the event such as an ethical relation can be based on resentment or resignation rather than the affirmation of positivity, the free subject, the ethical subject, one with the ability to grasp the freedom, depersonalize the event, transform to a negative change, more life, motion, change, transformation, potential, the firm's life is different than work. That's about ethics is about the freedom from negativity, work freedom from the understanding there are abundance of certain amount of pain is actually useful force. One thing about the actual material can just being interconnected between one and the wall. It frees one from the thing stupidly perfect health, full blown existential entitlements, and their anomaly deteriorates the force of habit introduces a powerful element of productive difference. While only those who have been hurt or in a position not to return violence and make a positive difference, they have become minoritarian, transform logic and negativity, transform the negative affect something active and positive. It is already a question of life and death, surfing on the board of the inevitable. So another way of describing the process of becoming any process of change must do something with sort of violence to deeply ingrained habits, overcome these ingrained habits, necessary disruption which there's no ethical awakening. That ethical project is not the same as the implementation of ruling standards, morality, joint necessity, growth, the pursuit of social change and in-depth transformation, as well as an ethics of endurance and sustainability is important to stress because critical actors who pursue change have often experienced limits to balance like open wounds and scars are a way to resist the dominant ethos of our conservative trends, while which idolizes the newest conservative trends while thundering against those who believe in change, cultivating the ethics of living intensely in the pursuit of change and political act. Now, why does the ballot matter? It's a site for debate to become something different and transfiguring. The orthodoxy of debate is a series of dialectical exchanges premised on the logic of either or. You can write debate as a site where affirmation produces new modes of becoming. Conway and 10. The middle is by no means an average. Identification with pre-existing reference points diminishes thought part of distinction in philosophical bents of debate. A position pre-establishes the inverse of base and issue. When identifies this inverse, the terminal position of counter position, counter position, counter deals the middle indicates thought frame of enclosure, middle becoming is shaped and reshaped of various conceptual ways to travel across. Becoming should not be confused with negation of the first term. Difference in becoming is irreducible to opposition or contradiction. Becoming is not a matter of the first term being equivalent to the second. Becoming is the construction of the first term accomplished using the second term as a point of reference. Genuine change applies to becoming as a necessary condition for the reorganization of social life.
What is problematic about the black-white binary?
We think that, in general, binaristic thinking is dangerous because it relies on a notion of dialectical history, which are evidences.
Tanya evidence specifically in the context of the black-white binary. She uses that as an example. Why is that problematic?
First, second, the black-white binary is not the only thing he's talking about. The broader point that Saldana is making is that sort of the man-woman binary, the straight-gay binary. What?
Sure, but your evidence is using the example.
It's using all these examples, but
a lot of ways, for example, it obscures particular other modalities of oppression. For example, settler oppression. For example, existing oppression in sort of the notion of policies.
Start from a binaristic thinking, i.e., black versus white.
We don't start. I think we start from a refusal of binaristic thinking and an affirmation of becoming.
From that perspective.
Why do we start from that
Because
perspective?
that's the situation that we believe that we are in. Part of the point is we have to be sort of radically immanent, radically sort of material to our context, and we cannot ignore that context. Sorry?
What constitutes the minoritarian?
The Saldana evidence and the Bright-Adi evidence indicate that becoming minoritarian means a movement away from what would be the sort of prevailing ideal, or the sort of what the Saldana evidence describes as a sort of white man face, which then just like sort of marks deviance.
He also
So
describes
movements.
He also describes a sort of broader ontological claim, which is that we're all sort of becoming minoritarian. The sort of idea of the majoritarian subject that doesn't really exist, and it's always individually fragile. Sorry?
Does the minoritarian become not white male?
Minoritarian is the refusal to sort of accept that standard as the ideal standard against which other things are met, and to insist on the sort of affirmation of minoritarian becoming.
Okay, good. I think it's Sam.
Yep, looks like it.
Nick says hi. Alright, good. Sorry, can I get the paper?
One off case.
Faciality does not simply produce identity, but it denies the flesh and politics of black becoming their politics rid of faciality always fails to attune to the frequencies of flesh vibrate beyond the limits of built as humanism and humanism of faciality politics. So if you've been remains this category app, we must start from the comment of politics of becoming black and fresh, reaching humanism beyond the dialogue we conceive, importing from the Cartesian marketing and learning by politics of flesh abuse acceptably disembodied subjects, bodies primarily visible, something to be seen in body flesh manifest other sensory queer, visualizing flesh not immobile, it's just that most of the frequencies that are visible to the modern human style is not earning, but is easily appear to the sensitive to other representatives of rational or relational flesh and peaks. Sometimes universes in their head representatives sensible to the man's view, but entirely sensible to the different perceptual practice outside the audience and non-dialectic flesh is not an object, no exclusion that culminates in the depth of alternative satiation of the humanity of the flesh is the depth of human is not in existence of flesh is a practice of not being human behavior systems reaching forgiveness philosophical practice putting about the face of man and sin with the municipal mutants films or hope describes as including interrupted dreams of freedom and found becoming black and exploration of the stuff, the necessity of life, the affirmation, affirmative affirmation of legally stuff that gets rendered by the body sees in humanist discourses found upon the black white binary other factors, the human objectives and the non-human factors stuff, anti-black post-humanism factor of human while our post-humanism factor of non-humanism is changed. In 14, the question is not who is to be on the liberal subject. And is liberalism dialectic solution and inclusion of liberalism? Is that a seller dialectic to putting everyone's voice and legitimately recognize the full exception to their life of which absolutely weird and movement science does make even make no so exclusion for sharing source of the sense of their life that exclusion and exclusion is showing left out about learning of listeners experience stories of exclusion. Absolutely no alternative about the bare life. It is occupies space formally occupied something like giving some counting of the field the flashes from space explosive absolute science exclusion is actually side of constitute potentiality exclusion. Exclusion constitutes the agency of the man who is potentially constitutes after beyond man. But it is possible to at TDA is when you sit so down graph and show no full thing university who is constructing by the books of your field of establishing sequence of creative world, virtual reality, cognitive dysfunction, social function, racial conscience simplifies the virtual reality because it's materially historically specific. The reality functions the virtual strict delusion sense of white supremacist heterosexual virtual reality where the hardware and the one you see there are performances and start from compared stories impression but the poetry we can put off performances away from the face is towards a black hole. This is Jones' intent. Qualification, critique, the determination of fiction given the inherent identities perceived since are only upon the application of fundamental self after themselves without in fundamental ways to in terms of retrieval real living heritage of also true to lend space to beneath the real reason for needing to close in our current productivity of their own desire to create a line of love is not taking form like something it was rather clear moving out of the stars return is finishing to a movement very black and towards the homeland from which becomes secretly a home in his new creative hits all the attributes distinct by body multiple because of the return to the mental firm liberate the act towards a new way of being able to recognize profound act and self-coaching inspired to return to constructive the very strive to burst from the duration for the repeat but also through his creation of the hand history biology created the slavery operation show them legacy of how potential characters something constantly constructed reinvented active form and delusions of thinking they need to form a multiple single differences from the heritage of black differences made from the object of German affirmation going in self-use of the world black identities return to recreation all hands and eliminate self in the course of history self-illusion and history feeling for the happy ending of demonization reality return to within ways such as the reoccupation of territory the process of decaricaturization black body has to become to elusive order his honor expression without organs that is achieved somatic a system for controlling a race world no longer torturing the latest stimulus as it has by behavior by liberating from the resist identity imposed by the character of lies across superior associates and Martin Cardier case. The highlighting the question of hybridity is misleading at best of all proliferation rates happening are simple subculture complexity and thoroughly investing in destruction of racial violence. Destruction of racial violence saw Donna in 2007 with hybridity and also augmentation on invention rich bomb babies trying to tackle both groups of overly money job to escape a shall near harbor from Robin's Indian DJ's clubs of Hollywood breaks on the hospital and then much on his psychiatrist local education region and crowd dances to Charles Ross and opera his Israeli loneliness and sincere talks of the beach shop and the Viking and he is rich and sharing a house.
Okay. So the last part on the K says that you sort of perform a better affirmation. Why should you win the debate? Or I guess why should we lose?
So why should you lose?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that construction of notions of competition sets the debate up in the form of negation. We think that.
Well, we think inevitably someone loses.
Well, we don't think so. In the context of this debate, in the context of the Deleuzian debate, we think that if we win at the alt is a better affirmation that is able to.
Okay, how do we determine a better affirmation?
Whether or not the one who sees politics as a form of humanist, post-humanism, or anti-black humanism.
Okay, so you've both accused us of being humanist and post-humanist. I don't really understand how those two things can operate simultaneously.
The performance of humanism in that it attempts to disarticulate the level of the human through starting from the figure of the human, which is blackness as deviation.
Wait, I'm sorry. How did the 1AC begin from the figure of the human of blackness as negation?
Through your focus on things like the black white binary, which is our sex.
Why did that start from that?
Because our sex and evidence says that focusing on the black white binary, this two things, the first thing that it does is the politics of sharp to non-givenness, which puts yourself in opposition to the binary.
I think that 1AC and cross-sex are pretty clear that that's not the only starting that someone is in the category of non-human or the place of non-human?
Well, it is that access which exists outside of faciality.
What is outside of faciality?
Blackness.
How do we know that?
Because the dialect says that there is the human and then there is the non-human, not that there is the black.
Why would you accept
in order
the
to
dialect?
justify the existence of the structure, you're reiterating the structure. Our argument is why we know it exists.
Affirming that which is prior to the dialect.
How do we know it's prior to the dialectic? Why? Like what?
Slavery is a thing.
Okay, so slavery is the sort of crucial precondition for the dialectical opposition. Okay, the Saldana evidence that you reread says that the reason that whiteness has been powerful is because whites have sort of maintained creativity and been the most creative race. The point of the 1AC is that we should refuse that creativity and refuse to give it to whiteness. So I guess why is this a link to the F?
The Saldana evidence is link is in the context of, I guess, the AF trying to get rid of things like, I guess, what is it? Like the proliferation of race being identifiable through racial formation. She indicates that within movements like the affirmative, it would just lead to multiculturalism, which
Okay.
is where things like cops, which is anti-black.
Yunte card says that racialized and colonized subjects who have experienced slavery have to have a unique access to becoming. How is that applicable to groups that have not, for example, been part of transatlantic slavery?
That's the point.
What is the point?
That the dialect between the human and the non-human allows those bodies to be relegated either into the position of the black, which is the process of fleshly becoming, or into the process of the human, which is the process of race as deviation. We think that the alternative is able to disarticulate that politics. We're diving into the black hole, which is our classes call that.
I'm good. 30 seconds? Is anyone keeping track?
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone ready?
So I'm just gonna put the case at the bottom of the K because I feel like.
What did you say? Can you speak louder?
Sorry, it's just gonna be the K.
Everyone's just like ignoring the podium with the microphones.
Ready? Thesis statement: we cannot use restrict ontology as a basis for understanding oppression. We cannot use exclusion as a basis for approaching inclusion. The role about should we do the best strategy for resisting oppression. The 1AC is all about various modalities of oppression: racial, class, sexist, heteronormative, but also the intersection between them. The way that Chinese women were only allowed to W Americans prostitutes, the way that railroad workers were forbidden from procreation because their babies would be white. The whether Latino and Latino Americans are consistently denied civil rights challenges on the basis of their so-called whiteness. This is important because faciality operates by overdetermining difference into categories that it can understand and control. Against this, we must affirm the multiplication of difference in the form of a pedagogy of becoming an understanding of culture, the complex series of articulation and interlocking of sources of power. That's good. First, dividing cognitive classic racial politics is zero sum allows for white supremacist ideology, dividing cognitive one group against each other. It's historically true. Ancient the model minority myth contributed to dismantling of social welfare and affirmative action. White supremacist ideology insists that historical redress be stopped because it trades off with the needs of other groups against us. We have to affirm racial identity. It's fundamentally interlinked, otherwise the binary becomes a political technology for white supremacy continue itself. The second is that it faces other forms of oppression. Their sort of notion of black-white binary ignores that racial identity is multiple expression of racial oppression occurs in multiple ways. You can't explain nativism, xenophobia, the idea that I don't belong here, or I don't speak English, the idea that I'm not loyal or authentic. Can't explain settlers in the form of the extermination of native peoples and the appropriation of the land, or the colonial history of the U.S. and East Asia, the modern fears of rising Chinese war taking over the world. I think the silence of the one and on this question demonstrates the theoretical lacunae that their insistence on becoming black operationalizes, which is to say that they do not recognize other modalities of violence at all. These all reinforce and inform each other, which means that any theory of race that papers over the multiplicity of oppression is doomed to fail, which turns all solvency. The third is affective resonance. Our brain audio argument makes a unique claim about the modality of affect and the status quo is oriented toward negativity, and more they negate the negation that exists in the world right now. This is an attempt to retrieve transformation from negativity, from the sort of ontological status of blackness as non-human, but it is part and parcel of the historical failure of the left. Being against racism doesn't have to mean being negative. The only way to found transformative politics is sort of affirmation, hope rather than negation. We should embrace creative force multiplication, which is all to say that there is no mutual exclusivity between our arguments. You can view this as a permutation. Our Conway evidence should frame the way you think about this debate. If they agree about the value of becoming, etc., then there is no reason why they should establish a strict hierarchy of competition between us. You should reject this forced choice in favor of becoming together. They can become black. We can become the crazy hybrid identity we would like to be. And this is a sort of necessary non-unitary subjectivity that creates the conditions of possibility with interconnection with non-human others. When they accuse us of being overly humanist, they are fundamentally misreading our argument. Our argument is not that there is no structures that we inhabit, or that there is no viscosity to the sort of ways in which we can immobilize our identities through the world. That's precisely the point. We are all engaged in particular structures and particular struggles, and we have to have a radical affirmation of that as a particular mode of transformative politics. Right out in 5A, non-unitary subject endorses radical ethics of transformation running against contemporary neoliberal conservatism and sustainable ethics of non-unitary subject proposing a large sense of interconnection. This self-understanding, including non-human others, by removing the obstacle of self-centered individualism, is a nomadic equal philosophy of multiple belongings and consciousness being defined accordingly as the core of the humanistic subject. Synchronizing multiple differences, shift to a bio-centered egalitarianism. Possible the subject is a post-identity, and embodied embedded identity, which exists and interacts with a number of external forces, not all of them human. Before we make the mistake that shift in scale for a qualitative shift in perspective, we need to develop more accurate cartographies in order to answer these challenges. The specific temporality of nomadic subjectivity needs to be accounted for. Faciality is the way that racialism operates, but it's not the way that all identity operates. Our argument about becoming and difference necessitates a sort of non-human ethics, which is exactly what they're talking about. Hannafin and 14 profit on micropolitics opposed human rights, subversive majoritarian model of human rights, figured as a white neoliberal male. There's such a contestatory micropolitics practiced by embodied means to actually reshape their position, both relationships shifted law and environmental figuration of access to citizenship seen in these struggle social movements, feminism to environmentalism, brain ideas, engagation of product, rethinking the political and man against each body to a unique individual in order to undo the conceptual default setting of political subjectivity and active refusal of disembodiment. This is politics becoming something other than we are defined by the political order, a deferential we, rather than a possessive individual's I that dismantles masculine subjects of right, transforming the political order through critical refusal. The right idea critiques the liberal model of animal rights. Animal rights is tantamount to becoming human of animals. It's the same flaws as traditional liberal models of rights. Majoritarian model of rights, valor rights, male power, capitalist social organization. Animals can only rights as long as they become human. This fails to recognize the singularity of animals as such in order to be included within the protected clothing of liberal rights. First, I vest oneself with one singularity, become human, when the human is figured in the abstract and always already male subject. The alternative model proposed by Brandati is premised on the singularity and becoming human. Is premised on philosophical nomadism, which holds that no qualitative becoming can be generated at the center. Man is a static dead core of the ego, index negativity. It is becoming animal of the human rather than becoming human of the animals that helps us move beyond the trap. Naked rights discourse, another form of subjection, the guise of emancipation. They say Saldana is dead. No, our argument about viscosity is a good register in which to discuss the relationship that we have to structure. The power argument is not that we're radically free from structure, that we can just become outside of anything. We are locked within the structures, but we have to recognize their fundamental contingency, which is the argument for why that you should reject the forced choice between the affirmative and the negative. Now, it's certain that the black-white binary is good. First of all, it's not horizontal. Our argument did not start or define itself in relationship to black-white binary. Instead, it defined itself as sort of an affirmative project of becoming that's necessarily a good thing. A rejection of the black-white binary does not deny the singularity of anti-black violence, but it's an insistence that all other modalities of violence, they're insisting that all other modalities of violence be reduced to the original set of two is necessarily violent. Six Korean Americans have been denied social category of being political at the same time they're being made subject to group-based capability. The black-white paradigm embraces incapable of theoretically, politically addressing race and wrong community. The colors, this is not all about white people. You claim only white supremacy would be denied agency and groups with the dominance and increasing country racism, multiple targeted variants, forms because of the black white paradigm, racialized groups such as Latinos, Asian Americans, and Native Americans are often marginalized. The black white paradigm disregard various groups from being able to define their own identity, mark their difference beyond what is captured on the limited map. We had descriptive voice and honest from the outside of the problem for two reasons. First, it's simply unfair to be excluded. Second, it's considerably weaken the analysis of racism by knowing specificities within the non-white group. Black white paradigms undercut the possibility of political solution. Variable forms of racial oppression contain the black white paradigm presupposes to understand all conflicts between communities, conflicts between anti-black race and white supremacy, when the reality is more complex and market complex. We are radically material in the way we conceptualize race, which steadfastly refuses the notion that difference can be reduced to predefined categorizations. They are the color blind ones. They refuse to see any colors except white and black. Their sort of ontological fatalism relies on the idea of black and white as transcendent, non-contingent ontological categories, which is false. Historically and theoretically, right there are 113 ontological fatalism. The cultural colonialism is absolute domain, and whiteness and blackness carried by a constellation of postulates woven and differentially. Collective attitudes is how the subject and are constituted. The very possibility of identity may be universal. Continue. It's a constant and continued meaning of six parties. Exclusion is not determined once involved. The fact for deciding the other same nowhere. Great and ontological so by political. The specific ones of other and the otherness are nowhere decided advances. Ontological relations really on the side of the object may be so deeply sentimental that it's not all the void of black being. Is the subject. I think that the process was indicative on this question. When we ask, how do we know that the structure of blackness is the sort of site of the non-human or non-ontology? They said because it is. They asserted the structure in response to our argument about whether the structure is true or not. And then finally, they say slavery. This links to our sort of racial origin to racial present argument that presupposes this unicausal timeline that renders blackness reactive and whiteness dominant. Right? 15 when a linear space-time epistemology begins with objects having being enslaved, colonized, etc. And so on. The loss of cause effect may be difficult to reverse binary that set in place because the oppression asserted is a cause of all. Sort of exactly those caused by a black reaction to the oppressor's action. A dismally fixed racing of black fixing which whiteness always retains the originary agency because origins dominate way racism is always essential actor. Black lives contempt status reaction that now is foregrounded by agency because black begins its own interpolation instead of black subject being moved down a line of cause effects strictly linear interpretation of the subject is variously informed by a variety of external and internal stimuli that can intersect. I do not move through the world reacting to the same stimuli all the time. Perhaps it is because the stimuli are never the same in space and time shifted for the black subject who seeks to adhere to the middle passage interpolation with clarity of this linear timelines belied by the familiar complexity of living moments, agencies, and ambivalent present our humanity is our burden. We need to do what is infinitely more difficult, except that young to evidence, her abstract theoretical construct by allied colonialism, but I sure as hell don't. My body is marked by colonial time. My legal status and this country is part of a history of the importation of Chinese tools and labor, railroads, subsequent yellow peril, the Reed Johnson and Chinese exclusion acts, etc., etc. It's all situated and sedimented constructs of identity that we have to engage in. What they identify as forgetting is in fact a radical refusal to remain beholden to the tyranny of history. It's a motive theory and practice that isn't locked in an oppositional dialectical relationship that takes trauma as the basis for our political subjectivity. This is necessary to avoid sort of an ecological catastrophe and existing through a sort of relationality that looks beyond simply black and white Brediani 13 a shift toward cleanliness and rethink that mortality in contemporary context, political meaning the policy of violent affirmation that ethically meaning to relocate both human and non-human others, vital policy shifts the boundaries between life and death and capitalism and aims at controlling all the lives that opens up the Zoe political dimension and the anxiety about extinction was common in the nuclear era, the post-human condition, says the death horizon of most species, nuclear war would have been consciousness and climate change and unintended consequences. This is a non-creative negative planetary bomb which will recompose humanity around vulnerability, death, and destruction of the common denominator, transversal alliance, transversal alliance, I marked that transversal alliance, let's see. They say we are a form of bad hybridity. I don't really know what it means for me to act more Asian than I actually am. This doesn't make any sense in this context because if we win our arguments about the structure of becoming, it's not that we can become anything. It's that we took this as a productive moment to sort of discuss the juxtaposition and difference between Brad's white cis male ontology and my particular positionality in relation to structures of colonial domination, which is necessarily a productive one, and that's our whole point. You should refuse the forced choice between Brad's whiteness and my Asianness as something that can be sort of the basis for our politics.
We don't think there really is one, is our point.
Okay, what is your evidence indicating?
That's funny because Deleuze definitely says there's a distinction.
We're not Deleuze.
The Brydati evidence makes a very specific claim, which is that Zoe is a form of life and becoming that exists outside.
Sorry, can you start from the beginning?
Cool.
I don't know. He says that.
Zoe is a force of becoming that exists outside of the human and the animal. It's partaken in by both forces. We don't think that there's like a fundamental distinction, although there might be sort of literal biological things that we could point to.
Okay, so what is your evidence, I guess, your Brydati evidence gets you in talking about the liberal model of animal rights?
It's an example. It's saying, for example, that our relationality, that our insistence on differentiation and plurality is not merely a sort of reification of the liberal humanist subject, but rather a radical deconstruction of them. So the argument, for example, you cast our argument as, in the sort of valence of animal rights, you cast our argument should become human. Our argument is that humans should become animals, which is sort of the opposite of human.
that as animals should become humans.
Sorry?
When do we say that?
The sort of move of liberal humanism is to bring more things within the sphere of our sympathies. Care about more things and the sort of idea that we could be responsible subjects. Our whole point is that we have to radically insist on differentiation as a means by which to deconstruct the idea that the liberal subject is infinitely self-reflexive and infinitely mobile.
Okay, what is the liberal subject, I guess,
What you would identify as the sort of human subject, right? The idea that there is no viscosity to the ways in which we navigate the world. Our point is that philosophical momentism is not. Sorry?
Who is the liberal subject?
Who is the liberal subject? I mean, traditionally, the sort of white heterosexual man.
Is that what you will defend it is?
That's certainly how Kant and Hegel
Yeah.
originally defined the term in opposition to sort of
We
like
don't really
African
think that's a productive understanding of what subjectivity is, which is the whole act, but I don't know.
Well, it's not productive subject.
Sorry?
It's not productive.
What's not productive about it?
Yeah.
That it does incredible violence to many people.
How?
How does white liberal subjectivity do violence to people? In many ways. For example, the sort of abstraction of the idea of people, black people, Asian people, the sort of originary violence done against natives.
Majoritarian and minoritarian.
Sorry?
What is the difference between the majoritarian and minoritarian?
So the majoritarian model is the sort of idea that we can abstract the notion of who subjects are in favor of, basically an aggregate consensus of what a subject is. Our argument is that we have to reject that in favor of.
last night?
I like this rad banquet that just kept going.
Kept going. I go to sleep for an hour and a half whenever I finally looked at my Facebook and I was like, oh, they announced the speaker award. We're 10 now. You finished the whole week? You finished the whole week? For real?
I have another class round.
Oh, okay. So you have another stuff.
I hate the week by week on these things, especially because they tell you other cards before.
It makes me so sad. I wanted to do it all. And I've got Daredevil and Game of Thrones coming up soon.
So it's going to be the criticism with an overview, and then the permutation is at the top.
Wait, so is the permutation above the overview?
You smart aleck.
No.
You know what he was been. Come on.
Obviously, the permutation is actually
The overview is above the top. Everyone knows it. It's like over it.
Brad's overview is something.
Brad is overview. Let's be honest. Becoming overview.
I don't think he's ever really done. Well, it's becoming line by line.
Becoming line by line.
We're never
It's
really
never
getting
getting
there.
there.
Yeah.
It's a horizon. Oh man, that was really working.
Wait, is everyone good?
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna need to watch your volume. It's actually really hard.
Kind of
It's been hard to hear you.
Well, I kind of yell when I speak anyway, but that's kind of like an overview. So. The process of faciality is only capable of analyzing the machine that produces identity and deviation from the norm, which may be true for the vector of the human, but if this articulates the level of non-human, the level of the black is the level of the flesh. Black is not a racial identitarian construction, meaning it does not have a face, it is not a structure, it is captured, fungible, which means that there is no deviation in it, because in the world of blackness, all faces look the same. The alternative does not cross off from the level of blackness and show as a stereotype at the top of the spiel of the one they see what seems to suggest that the level of the flesh, I even friends, for nonsense that from the perspective of humanist gaze, we are always figures, but flesh is not deviation, it is vibrations, another tune, and alter frequencies that exist in the state of becoming black, which is a new vector, which is the only true affirmation to a process of the flesh. This is why the lack of rhythmatic humanist political performance of Boeing is zero, cannot tip into given, it cannot theorize vibrations, the sounds, the alternate agencies of becoming black, which is a disaster to the permutation. You can go there now, they do not get a permutation, it's a method, the method by which process of becoming is a true form of affirmation. The permutation would do things like make debate of a competitive model, which we will have an impact on to, because this recreates a traditional competition that structures to meet its premise on the model of negation, i.e. the idea that there is no mutual exclusivity between the all and the affirmative, which turns their framing of debate as a process of becoming, because it locks the alternative to the position of absolute negation into the position of things like fungibility, preventing the development of becoming through the black hole, which is alternative. This is Schaefer and to have a lot of institutional purpose to preempt on the constructive life system we identify and attach ourselves to. These institutional purposes, so the values and purposes of humanized emotional dimension make us human of no value. Institutions that choose their policy in a sense of reading this is only perpetuating and such things of value. Only functional resources one behalf institutions once we've identified ourselves any person beyond something about the game of most which forms wrongdoing, but our willingness to attach ourselves to external values separate us in a sense of vis-a-vis. In addition, the permutation would have to be separate because they're regarding evidence piece of the R1 piece of evidence, which comes from the second page after they cut there. It indicates that their notion of freedom is a distancing of historical trauma, i.e. that in order to affirm a process of becoming, we would have to distance ourselves from the historical trauma of blackness, which is a linear argument that they make at the bottom of the flow, which would have to be severance, because it would have to foreclose the possibility of recognizing the complex history of the fleshliness of the vector of blackness, which is problematic for the ways in which we affirm a process of becoming, because if you never test whether or not the affirmative process of becoming is one that is beneficial for resolving not only the dialect, but also resolving the process of violence. Now this link, all of the links are disasset permutation there. First was the sex and evidence, which they are not properly handling, indicates that their insistence on the black-white binary identitarian model turns affirmative, because faciality is a capture machine, but there is no capturing for blackness, because blackness is always rendered flesh from the perspective of humanism. The black from the perspective of humanism. This is a prior question in which blackness is already situated before the die like this, has a few impacts that they are conceiving. The first is that it silences black dissent, which crushes the possibility, the alternative, because like vast scholarship, it guarantees that their politics produces anti-black coalition struggles that reaffirm humanism in the state, which fractures the possibility of the permutation of the affirmative's ability to unite a multiplicity of difference, because that difference will still be coded by the process of humanism just folding in the vector of blackness. Now, additionally, then, in position that the one NDT is a model of identitarian politics, another link, because it is an obsession with the identity politics. It is the capture of anti-blackness that stops, checks and checks the alternative with things like bullets, with things like, hey you, are you talking about identity? Hey you, you're talking about blackness. Is that a moment of the dialogue, which is a moment in which it will prevent the alternative from accessing the politics of become, which means that it's a question of a sequence of this, that because James evidence indicates that since blackness is a prior question that is always needs to be affirmed, our alternative needs to come first. This is section A. Whiteness is parasitic when blackness rooted in the maintenance of blackness in the position of the unfungible object of accumulation, exchange, socially excluded by symbolic control. Whiteness does not and cannot exist in its own right. There are no positive qualities of whiteness, only differences between whiteness and race and the other black one. There's other difference. One is differentiated of the other. This is why every apparently vigorous or irreducible opposition becomes to be qualified as a theoretical fiction. For non-refigures this insight about the indeterminate play of racial difference. When he warns that there is two camps of white and black, and we found that they are often quite fluid. There is a number of ways to specify often fluid metaphysics of race with the mechanics, the delirium, anti-black world phenomenon points to the ways forward, contrary to productive images of his work, as exhausted by the writer of the conflict. We must attend to discerning the same as non-sense to unhook ourselves from the oppositional dynamics of the law, the transgressive remaining passive detached to map out the contravailing forces of anti-blackness. We must traverse the effective terrain ontologically prior to the conceptual dichotomy between the other and the distinction where there are not objects, only processes that produce the one and the other. The use of water seeks out the traces of multiplicity that smooth to becoming the anti-blackness situates and attempts to capture the social forces of desire production and the social being of the other. Now, additionally, the second link argument is out Saldana evidence, because she indicates that no superficiality fails to do things like analyze whiteness, which makes the one to see problematic is always reify the structural position of the human. Even their evidence says that we need to understand viscosity through becoming a dangerous because it is parasitic on black fast, i.e. He says that their politics of the one they see their politics of becoming a result is shit like eat, pray, love, which we tore the fucking world to the fucking world, because our Saldana evidence indicates that this is emblematic in the way that white people can go to Indian restaurants and feel like they are affirming the multiplicity of things like motherfucking identity formation, which is a form of anti-blackness, because the guy doesn't recognize that there is a predetermined vector that structures the way that interaction between white people and Indian restaurants occur, which makes it the possibility of consumption of the other, which actually turns to affirmative. Now, there's also a performative aspect of the one to see that the affirmative permutation can capture that the playing of jazz music, the reading of poetry, and the James evidence is a speaking, is a sound study that speaks through faciality, that doesn't recognize that blackness doesn't have a face, but blackness is constituted through sound, through vibrations, through movements, which is a performative net benefit to the counter-advocacy that is able to resolve the affirmative faciality arguments, will also take the inverse to James 14. The sonic tune is a tool for disrupting established humanities, discipline, methods, a philosophical respectability is white, so premise ableist capitalist system, federal patriarchy, sound study should be to practice a currently changing ways of knowing and relationship orientation. They require sound study to make us less respectable humanists and the inquiry is to use sound as a metaphor to render the less extra-visual, verbal, brilliant, thinkable, but to do things that manifest as sound white, feminist materialism overlooks the voice, is not anchored in the Western man, but is the condition of the speech, rituals and simplicities to his vocalizations to signal, non-human vocalizations to noise mark, and noise. Now, most of these arguments on the floor are indicted to focus on the notions of ontology, which is not the alternative. Our James evidence indicates that blackness is always a state of becoming, that we are more delusional than you are given, not only the way that you structure debate, but the way that you structure your politics and negation to the black-white binary, which means that James evidence indicates that blackness is always in the concept of a process of becoming flesh, becoming vibration, becoming sound, becoming me, which means that you don't meet your role as the valid argument, because all of the link arguments are impact turned to it, but only the alternative is able to resolve. Like you say, divided conquer, that is done when you stop and frisk the alternative for whether or not to stop and frisk the alternative is this. It was a motherfucking Wilderson into criticism, not actual affirmation of form of becoming. Now you say focus on black, white, binary, but that was done above because the one sees as a focus on black, white, binary, but your insistence that we does is that stop and frisk mentality, but also means that you focus on the black, white, binary, situating the impacts of your affirmative. Now you say permutation, but that work was done above. Now additionally, you say no viscosity with the alternative. If one turns is because your evidence even indicates that there is viscosity to the way that the dialect plays out, but also the alternative is able to resolve this. Hence, the piece of evidence that I brought above. Now you say necessitates human ethics, but all of the link arguments to why you resituate the human on the alternative is able to resolve this whole process of becoming black, or process of diving into the black hole to deal with practice as a process of things like becoming. Now you say you do not define yourself in relation to black, white, binary, but I think how bullshit, because your first piece of Saldana evidence is all about how the binaryistic thinking is problematic in relation to how Sumo can affirm himself as not a model minority, but this affirmation of Sumo's identity in relation to the black, white, binary is that politics of presumption. Now you is that politics of presumption. Now none of the rest of these arguments on the flow are responsive because the one they say is not a linear notion of time, but a cyclical notion of how the structure of anti-blackness from people like say has reduced the black to flesh will always say the black becoming.
Ready? Yep. Why does blackness have no face?
Because it is always relegated to the position of flesh.
Always. That's an interesting word.
Which means
why always?
Given the way that the human dialectic is constructed, is that black is always
Constructed
in the
how?
process of.
Does this exist beyond time? Is it metaphysical, this structure of human and non-human?
It's a combination of all of those things.
So it is metaphysical and beyond
Vis-a-vis our sex and evidence.
Okay, so,
But within that,
I guess
dilemma of blackness, there is a possibility to become the flesh, which our James evidence indicates.
Is there a
not only
possibility to become not
precondition-
the flesh?
Huh?
Is there a possibility to become not the flesh?
To become not flesh is to become human.
Sure. Is that a possibility?
We think the 1AC was the politics of becoming.
No, I'm asking, is that...
Yes,
so
the
you
1AC is a prime example of how that is possible. You have become the human, you are not the flesh.
And so it's only good to be the flesh, is your argument.
In relationship to a set.
Okay, so I was, this is a little confusing to me because at once you're like, we are the better delusions and thus we solve all your becoming stuff, but then your arguments for the sort of priority you should give to claims of anti-blackness is that there's an ontological split between human and non-human because history totally determines.
Dialectic split between the human and the non-human that renders certain bodies as flesh, certain bodies as human. Even Deleuze makes this argument in terms of the way that.
Right, but he argues that it's contingent. Why does blackness have no face, or why can it never have a face?
Because of the position of fungibility in accumulation.
Because of what is that?
Our James evidence. Our James evidence indicates that.
Your James evidence doesn't talk about fungibility or.
Our James evidence talks about the concept of the black hole, which is Césaire's articulation of fungibility and accumulation prior to notions of black studies.
Go on. So why is that true?
Because the way that the world and the dialectic between human and non-human is set up.
So it's true because that's the way the world works. Is your argument?
Sure, that's the way the dialectic is set up. We don't think that the dialectic is set up between white and black. We think that the dialectic is set up between human and non-human.
What is the dialectic? What is a dialectic?
Oppositionary, binaryistic thinking.
Just an opposition?
I mean, they can conflate and interchange, but we think that that is the status of the human, which is the conflation of.
So blackness is defined by its inability
This is the
to
distinction between the 1AC and the alternative, because you assume that the human can become the animal, which is a conflation of the way that our evidence indicates the dualistic thinking actually works. Is that even that process of becoming animal is a process of.
So what does becoming mean to you then? If you're making all these statements and then say that we are better becoming, what does becoming mean to you?
It means embracing the vibrations and the sounds.
So it means
vibrations.
It's
an affirmation of the flesh.
So becoming means affirming your being, is what you're saying.
Affirming your flesh.
And that flesh, it does not change because of relationships of history and metaphysics, is your argument.
Well, our last piece of evidence, which I think is James and the 2NC, indicates that through affirming the vibration of the flesh, we're able to produce a new form of post-humanism in which we can move away from all of the impacts.
So James evidence there.
Yes.
Yeah. And you read the whole thing?
No, I marked it at non-human vocalization for Noah. To Noah.
No one has ever talked about it. Quiet. We've been
The
over
conversation
this.
was about disrupting things, so I figured.
Now you're disrupting our conversation about somebody else being disruptive. Just a disaster.
And you would hate judging with me.
I already do. I'm currently hating judging with you. Be quiet.
I'm so glad this happened.
You can become quiet. Think about it. You guys are along with plan.
At least if you're too. Well, that's something. No, yeah.
About 27, so bad.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to do the same order. I have a lengthier overview, so I guess maybe we need to save space where he made his overview. You know, I don't know, it makes sense to me.
It's just gonna be an overview. Just write it all.
Yeah, I'm becoming mind blown. Alright, everyone ready? The case is afterwards, so I'm just gonna go through
Wherever he says something about the case thing, you go, Dad, shut up.
Alright, everybody good? Thesis, you shouldn't use this strict political ontology for understanding oppression. The ballot endorses the best strategy for resisting its key to turn the ballot into an object of becoming rather than being. They can win all their arguments, but unintelligibility and change doesn't mean we're wrong with the political process. In the context of Michael Knight's assemblage of intellectual production, the root cause of anti-blackness was a humanist and dialectical notion that emerges as Hume, Hegel, and Kant would presuppose the black is situated against the cultural creativity of the white. The app does not begin in opposition to anti-blackness, but the destruction of the man, woman, gay, straight, free, unfree. The mode of thinking is a colonizing one. The negative is reaffirmation of non-humanness of the black body versus the binary without dissolving it. These dyadic forms of thought reduce subjectivity to poles. Fear outperforming blackness, you're being white in this best case. You're just a junior partner of whiteness. Becoming black doesn't resolve any element of the absolvance because it's a question of creativity. Otherwise, to resist the dyad completely. Now, faciality is not the same thing as saying we're all free. No man to the re-signifiers ourselves willy-nilly. Faciality is an abstract machine that creates an average white man standard and parcels out demons from that point. It's why Europeans pretended Christ was white. The reason that European scientists believe that human monogenesis began with white bodies and then we became black with climate change. The anti-blackness conceptual marker for one element of the broader process of facialization. Blackness is captured by so many other faces. Asian captives, Jewish captives, etc., etc. Fungibility is not trans-historical and intrinsic to black individuals, but re-articulated through contingent moments, which is why native slavery was actually the prerequisite to chattel slavery in America. Their framework makes thinking historical complexity impossible because everyone has to be put back into the black and then into the black hole. There's no such thing as being white. Rather, there have been historical ideals of whiteness which have been challenged and dismantled in different spaces and times. You should think of desire as productive rather than repressive, which is what a lot of their evidence does, which means we have to think about becoming in a positive form. Otherwise, it's the bright eye evidence. Our affirmative is not the liberal humanism that the majority of their evidence presumes. Post-humanism doesn't mean anyone can become anyone. The Saldana and bright eye evidence begins by presuming that flesh is viscous, but this doesn't mean that we're locked into dialectical categories. We need to craft reaffirmations that use that viscosity. Otherwise, the Saldana rereadings are all non-starters. Saldana says that whiteness has used becoming and creativity to control racial energy, but concludes that the most effective way is to resist is to create assemblages that resonate differently and take back that creativity by intervening into racial performance and legal structures. Posthumanism means the human that the Enlightenment thought imagined never existed, which is a more effective way of challenging anti-black violence as well as species-based violence. That the reaffirmation of the category of the non-human diving into the black hole has no actual solvency, articulation, nor any explanation for how it resolves the affirmative. They've conceded a series of external impacts versus nativism, xenophobia, language questions, loyalty, and authenticity. All were 2 AC arguments that I shouldn't have to re-extrapolate here. The framing arguments that were not Rosie, Brightati, or Arun Saldana were a remix and re-enunciation of their philosophy, so you need to hold Towson's links to a high standard of explicitly articulated reasons. Our affirmation was a bad one. Now the permutation, we can do both. We can theorize black becoming from the point of anti-black violence articulated partly through the middle passage while also emphasizing the necessity of other non-black groups to creatively re-articulate their becomings. Think about this, about the possibility of sort of making the flesh resonate. Otherwise, permutations are good if we both agree that becoming should be the framework to think debate, which means nonetheless, which has to be competitive. We have to think about how agonism can function outside dialectics. The Conway evidence is the theoretical justification. It says you should reread and reinterpret the A through the B in a performative return. It's not severance. We didn't begin against blackness, so the resentment arguments don't make any sense. Recognizing fleshiness of blackness is consonant with our arguments because it's not about white fluidity. The point is simply that their re-articulation of a best affirmation still needs to demonstrate it accounts for the asked questions theory insolvency. If it's true that
they are open to becoming and overcoming the semblance is good. The app is not the one you see, but a continuous process of emergence and enunciation. Otherwise, it restricts the app to staticity, which is the same form of balance they claim is done to the black body. They concede the white focus to said we're not isolated individuals hanging out, but creating an assemblage between Michael and I. The repetitive re-articulation and linkage to the app by pointing out my individual whiteness reaffirms their investment in a liberal notion of isolated subjectivity. The repeated negative assertion that the app is white because I'm here and that Michael's just resentful against black and the black-white binary is odd because the app makes it eminently clear we're rejecting multiple modalities of binaristic thinking. Now the specific link argument silent. They say we silence blackness. We're not folding the app into our humanist politics. We've offered an alternative modality of thinking. The impression of anti-blackness is ontological, but inside a process of changeable becoming, which is the crucial differentiation. They say sequencing, but there's no justification for this. If we win our theoretical presupposition to say we have to become black before we can think Chinese becoming makes blackness into a universal optic through which all other subject positions must view themselves with French's blackness into a colonizing mode of becoming and reaffirms a kind of strange view from nowhere. Their sex and evidence reaffirms the app's reading because it indicates we have to think race is a machine, but admit that there are differences. We're not assimilation because we begin from the point of cultural difference and blackness as difference. The alternative assimilates dramatically more because it pulls every other body into the black and white slot. Now, we're not forcing assimilation, though. That was the sort of one in our argument since the debate. It's a question of theoretical orientation and pragmatics. He says, eat, pray, love. There is not a single reason where this kind of politics. I answer the bad Saldana cards above. They say performance. They concede the reverse authenticity. DA, the suggestion of not performing scripts, norms of performance from Michael, and insist that he needs to act more Asian to prove he's not just working within a white racial assumption. The impact was articulated above. There's no impact to the sonic sound argument, but the place their mode of placing a certain mode of sound over others creates a demand upon a certain mode of sonic articulation, which is just as valid. We still meet our role as about. He says stop and frisk. I don't know why this is true. We're responding to certain theoretical articulation of the alternative suggestion that we're the police. If we respond as politically destructive because it removes the possibility of co-articulation, co-production. Two pieces of conceded offense. First, the linearity just had the right evidence is very good. It says we shouldn't read the present through the lens of a singular past connected to the middle past, which is reduces individuals and the present to a strict determination by event in the past, which creates resentment at the level of subjectivity because blackness is always reactive to an overdetermining whiteness. Second, posthumanism just that the only way to think politics level of the species and climate requires a movement away from focus on the epidermal schema. There, becoming flesh argument denies environmental and ecological orientations. Otherwise, we're not saying we can literally become animals. That we have to accept that the human is fundamentally unstructured. Climate change creates destruction of the ground of their political ontology, which means that impact and extinction outweighs the other one in our specifically. The Saldana evidence flows negative. The police brutality is explicable in our framework because it's a question of how certain bodies, geographical proximities, institutions, and intensities create the conditions for dramatic and brutal violence. We're not multiculturals, and we don't want the terrible police unless they're willing to give up on the centrality and sanctity of the white ideal. We're not neoliberalism. Either the meta evidence we can suggest that partial assimilation and incorporation of bad ideas. The irreducible difference between white and black is actually easier for multiculturalism to consume because it allows for a homogenized assumption that all black folk are the same black folk. The reaffirmation of racial, sexual, and national creativity and becoming minoritarian makes that generalization impossible, but also destroys the multicultural notion of tolerance because it's about re-articulating the structures of the world to fit with our resonances, which is not a sort of commodification and continuation of the democratic system. Now they say capitalism link, but that doesn't make any sense. It's answered by the Braidotti evidence, which indicates that the sort of post-human perspective breaks this down. They concede sort of Hegelian flipping this out here, which I sort of explained above, but applied to this police argument, I guess. Cool.
Most of the arguments in the overview assume that blackness is an identity, but they argue considering a few link arguments. The first is that the one process of bringing the word officiality, the process of turning into the frequencies of the flesh, which vibrate us beyond the limitation of the affirmative human and the humanism of officiality, i.e. their analysis of identity is tied to face two things like visuality, which folds blackness back into the dialectic of human and non-human, given that the flesh blackness moves at a frequency that is invisible to humanism, but modernity becomes visible when we tune into other branches, i.e. their attempt to put blackness into the black-white binary, into the black-white dialect. And when I see James, evidence is really good on the question about how flesh is in an abstract zone of exclusive, which resolves all of their binary arguments, given that our James evidence indicates that the flesh is a practice of becoming, not being human, which resolves all of the index ontology and linear notions of time, because they are conceding our fundamental interpretation of blackness from the beginning of the debate, i.e. it is not an identity construction, it does not have a face, but it's premise on the space of non-being, the black value of the black hole and vibrations and frequencies that signal beyond the plane of Jews, the plane of the formative aspect of Jews, of beliefs in the one entity which are second to move us beyond the realm of the human, beyond the realm of the dialect between human and the non-human. Now, they are also considering that they have fundamentally misinterpreted the dialectic in the one entity. Sedano evidence is a process of becoming, of mobile becoming R. Sedano evidence is actually really good at describing exactly how the fucking affirmative will play out. It says that attempting to establish linkages between Bowman and Sewell, which Sedano says is a misanalyzing of the workings of whiteness, i.e. establishing modes of connection between Bowman and Sewell. Looks like Bowman showing up at Sewell's house for dinner to explore the differences of the multiplicity that is Sewell, whichever way he deems fit. This is a process of becoming different, which is linked to the capitalist colonialist legacy of the dialect between black-white binary, which also Sedano evidence indicates is only capable of resituating the binary, but also causing things like capitalist commodification of difference, i.e. white showing up at Indian restaurants to test the food to expose the multiplicity between their cultures. This is a link back into the humanist notion of how becoming process plays out into the world. The affirmative, the one and Z, starts from the dialect of starts from the position of the non-human versus the human. Our James evidence is really good on the question about how when we dive into the black hole, we're able to produce a new orientation to blackness, i.e. not blackness as an identity construction, but blackness as fleshiness, blackness as a form of vibration and frequency that is able to signal us into a new post-humanist world beyond the humanist world. The affirmative, additionally, their focus on the black-white binary is a fucking link argument vis-a-vis their one and Sedano evidence, because our argument has been that it resets the black-white binary, i.e. we are not talking about blackness in relation to whiteness. Only the affirmative has been, which has two things. One, it resituates the black-white binary, causing the one and impacts, but additionally, it's a politics variant in things like horizontal, because they posit their politics in opposition to the black-white binary, i.e. Sewell becomes whatever is not included in the black-white binary, which our section evidence indicates is only capable of resituating things like self-hatred, which turns the affirmative's role as a ballot argument, because they will never become a model. Only the alternative is able to. Now, additionally, they do stop and first the alternative, because they check whether or not the alternative is about identitarian principles, which we have been saying from the cross-section. We want to see that this is not a motherfucking world critique, but we do not recognize that blackness is ontological. Our James evidence is really good on how blackness is always already in a constant state of becoming prior to things like the middle passage, which makes most of the arguments on the flow of non-response and the object of permutation debate here. They are conceding that they do not get method debate, which means that you have to evaluate this debate based on who has the best affirmation of things like the best politics of affirmation are considered sheet for evidence indicates that when you attempt to make debate into a competitive mode of competition that creates debate as a space of negation in which they separate the debate up as a competing methodology, means we have to give reasons to reject the affirmative. This our sheet for evidence indicates that this is only ever able to perpetuate the logic of fungibility and exclusion, making it impossible to access the space of black hole, because the one will always be premised on negation of things like blackness, things like fleshiness, which is an impact term, not only to the permutation, but also to the one because it is performing a double term, because they will never be able to situate debate as a space of becoming, because they will always reify the dialect of negation. Now, their argument is that the counterweight evidence is we need to find antagonism that beyond the dialect that is our James evidence, that is the place of the black hole, which you want to see forecloses by all of the link arguments above all of these other impacts on the flow are resolved through the alternative, because this essentially been a pick, because even if they want to risk that the assault their particular notion of becoming weak, they'll pick out of the whiteness of the affirmative, which is even if they are right, it is good for them in the initial abstract materially. We have inroads to your analysis that you're becoming collapsed down into multi-ritual capitalism, which reifies Hegelian dialectic, while the pick alone is more better than your affirmative, which is if we win a risk of offense against the criticism, that is enough to vote negative because it means that we resolve most of the case debate while avoiding the situation of the human, non-human dialogue. Now, additionally, case debate saying blackness can come versus the negation that results in the positive simulation through our argument of everything because whenever the strange becomes too strange for a productive or product of multiculturalism, they have two fates. One, to be folded into the new, true, the racist folded into neutrality. The one is the erasing things like difference. Two, this unassimilated one expelled from the project leading to things like policing of those bodies in the movement. This impact turned. The impact is neoliberalism because it served as a tool of domestication to accumulate one shared narrative. Now, the Sudanese evidence indicates that police will be invited to further regulate and to interrogate the movement, which is the one that sees form of dialectical relationships or officiality will never be able to solve y'all.
Y'all have to go to the bathroom before.
No, I'm probably going to go with you.
Alex, how much time do we have once we get started?
8:17. By the way, Brad, congratulations on your Oscar. I was like, I can't be the only one who thinks this, and then all of a sudden, like, my Facebook timeline started blowing up. People being like,
So I think I heard this from a debater first, and I thought it was a sort of isolated opinion, and then I just started hearing people like in public discussing it. I just like on the subway, I overheard this group of people like, it looks like that guy.
it is uncanny. What's uncanny? So the guy who plays,
I look a lot like young Stephen Hawking from Theory of Everything, at least in some photos.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
just the hair and the glasses. There.
I'm not sure on a promise.
Yeah. Very much so.
I don't know. I don't think the facial features are all that alike. I think it's just like the skinny white dude hair glasses thing.
Yeah.
The
There's-
ears are very similar.
Someone did a comparison. Oh, actually, Sarah. Someone did a comparison between the two, and there's like one picture of me that does look exactly like Mark.
Real. like something. I guess they're a combination of like more minority stories with like new sort of literary experimenting what could have happened, you know, like what was not just pilot. Yeah. Yeah. It's really good. I think the main reason it's really appealing is he makes a lot of like the very academic. He's just really very well read. The author is, you know, like it's not just like a like what was that movie that came out a couple years ago, just like some professor is like, say you denounce God or you fail my class. Yes. Yeah, I do. I think you go. It does. Yeah, absolutely. But I guess the main reason why I like the readers like that movie is because it's such like a dumb caricature of reality, you know. The Fool the Cause does a really good job of everything like a very intellectualized and it's kind of annoying to me because it's like he's very much like the Christian side, but because it's like so well developed, it doesn't really bug me all that much.
Luck is the only thing that can do.
The first question is how you should decide to submit our arguments, and the judge must intellectually endorse the best strategy and method for resisting oppression. View this through the lens of the permutation. There's a fundamental tension in their argument between an affirmation becoming their attempt to establish competition. They can win the vast majority of the two in our arguments about the necessity of becoming blackness and posthumanism. However, it's not a reason to vote. It's not a reason to vote negative. They assert that we should get the permutation, but all of their arguments are contradictory. They say the permutation locked them into negativity, yet they spend the whole 2 hours calling us white, which obviously means that it doesn't really that doesn't really make any sense. Getting rid of the perm doesn't prevent dialogue from competitiveness. It amplifies it because it allows it amplifies it because we don't actually talk about the sort of different particular notions. Conway provides the theoretical justification for the permutation. You have to reject the either artificial either or the status as object. The sort of the way the debate proceeds is A is different from B. Therefore, you should vote for B instead of A. Instead, you should vote through A. Vote for A as a rereading of B through A, which is exactly what the permutation means in this instance. I think the one a great explanation of what the permutation means in this context is rereading of Becoming Blackness through the sort of dialectical lens of faciality, which I think that is necessarily better. It even sort of makes sense in the register of all their arguments about sonicity. You should vibrate together in blend wavelengths. That sound doesn't have competitiveness. You can't create barriers, and if you create barriers, it necessarily cuts off the sort of modes of becoming that they think are necessary. Double bind. Either we get a firm or their understanding of how language functions betrays solvency for the alternative, because it means that fundamentally closes us off to become. There are a couple of benefits of the permutation. First is the post-human is that which I think they drop besides saying that they solve a clear offense, only giving them your singular focus on the human, and flesh creates the possibility for a species ethic that solves climate change. Conscious concern for life is key to mobilize the necessary sacrifice. The impact was dropped in every speech, so we shouldn't have to re-articulate much of this. It's just the ground, the conditions, the possibility for becoming at all, which means that you should sort of prioritize that their only response is that since they're flesh, they're post-humanism, but they conceded the non-humanism argument and articulated the 1AR in their attempt to abolish the human becomes an obsession with the negative dialectical pole of the human. So radicalism that renders thought about post-human justice unthinkable. It's our bradyadium between these sort of affirmative post-human ethic, which we don't just talk about flesh. It's not just about flesh. It's not just about bodies. It's about the sort of relationality that we have, the affective and molecular and these sort of the molecular and chemical relationships that we have with both ourselves, each other, and the environment, which is sort of only the thing that the affirmative access to our relational ontology rather than which emphasizes the sort of becoming of the necessary becoming of the flesh. The second is the divide and conquer argument. This is not just a coalition argument. It's an argument about why essentializing difference in political technology, whiteness is historically true of ages. I talked about the model minority myth above, and he dropped it. It's the reason why they don't actually solve any of the sort of harms that they're trying to characterize against us. We have to affirm racial identity as fundamentally interlinked process of becoming. Their insistence on blackness as a non-identity, the idea that it exists in a fundamentally different register, is precisely the kind of ontologization that we're talking about. I'll get to that later. However, it also means that they don't solve. They will assert that they do this because they do this because if we reach post-humanism, then it doesn't really matter anymore. I think that you should pay attention to the way that this argument played out throughout the entire debate. We said that this is good. They posited anti-blackness as sort of a originary principle that you should give priority to. We said that our thing matters too, and they said no, that's a distraction, which is precisely what will happen if this sort of interpolates outwards. It also faces other forms of oppression, the sort of settlerism DA and the American foreign policy in the contemporary world DA that I think they have conceded these all reinforce and inform each other, which means that any theory of how identity, race, or blackness functions that papers over the multiplicity of oppression is doomed to fail. That turns out solvency. Now, also the affective resonance DA, which I also think they conceded, focus on negativity, the idea that blackness can never become human, never can enter the register of human because it is only flesh. Becoming flesh just means becoming your being, which is the thing, distinction they have conceded. Faciality operates by over-determining difference into categories they can understand. In order to win this debate, they must establish that you ought to give ontological priority to the question of blackness. I'll get to the theoretical problems with insisting that blackness is somehow totally different from non-blackness later, but I don't think they've done a good enough job just demonstrating why that's fundamentally the case. Faciality is a better explanation for all of their arguments than sort of the becoming flesh. Their change of insists that flesh is a set of non-identity, which is somehow unintelligible to white modernity, but then they make arguments about the hypervisibility of blackness. Elsewhere, argument is that flesh is not that flesh somehow escapes the ordering function, but that it is too easily ordered. It's fundamentally fungible. Flesh is only one element of a broader regime as well. Our arguments about sort of the relationality of affect and chemistry and all of these things, it means it's not totally reducible to the question of our bodies, which is a reason why we need a sort of ethic that goes beyond simply focusing on the question of the body. That means that the alternative doesn't solve our Hudson or right out of our DH2 understanding. The flesh is totally predetermined by the structures of history. I think once again the 2NC cross-section is pretty good, pretty nauseous on this question. He just says because of the history of slavery, this is true. Our argument is that you shouldn't realize, you shouldn't have this teleological phenomenology which turns their arguments about lived experience and the ressentiment, because if they produce ressentiment that can only produce vengeance and anger, is the only response to the failure of recognition or incoherence that is to alleviate the room of traumatic history and also destroy the possibility for creating value, because those value structures can only be reacted. Their alternative doesn't solve. They claim over and over again to be a mode of post-human becoming flesh, becoming non-human, but every other argument they make is a betrayal of that promise. I think the 2NC cross-section once again perfect. It's why is black is irreducibly fungible, and all they can respond is that's how it is. That's how the world works on the metaphysical level. That cannot be a better explanation of the ontologization of the world and the betrayal of the ability of transfiguration of destruction. That's how it is. If blackness have to magnetize both and are constitutively excluded from the cortex of political by logic of their flesh. How can we found a policy of political subjectivity that aims to transfigure that order? They say that we stop in prison. Obviously, we don't. It's an act of interpolation. We didn't do it violently. I think our entire point is that we have a better explanation of all these things. They say they're necessary fluidity. Our argument is not that structures don't exist. It's that we have to recognize those structures are fundamentally contingent. They haven't done a good enough job of explaining why that isn't the case. They say they pick out of whiteness. This doesn't make any sense. If we win any of our other arguments about becoming, they can't staticize them. Just say we take one part out of it because that recognizes that becoming is fundamentally impossible, and that we should ontologize these things in favor of a particular modality. That the multiracial capitalism arguments once again don't make any sense. If we we are structuring arguments about how identity functions because faciality operates not through these sort of illusion of difference, multiplication of difference is a way of disrupting the regime of faciality that is also the regime of multicultural capitalism.
point in terms of how we understand becoming in a larger, I suppose, academic ways in which we engage that. I think that means that the alt solves the app because the evidence and the our explanation, I think, is very good about how the subject that is fundamentally non-human, which I think resolves your speciesism dissent into 1-2AR, and isn't premised on the ontological binary of white over black, ergo all of, or most of the other dissents I think you go for. I think the reason why I think this is true is because I think the warranting in the 2NR in terms of or rather, I think the warranting in the 2AR in terms of the links that you're going for in terms of why they would be that kind of ontologization of race don't seem to be consistent with the explanation of blackness in terms of the 2NR, i.e. the zone of blackness as a constant state of becoming doesn't necessarily seem to indicate the kind of anti-black slaves that the Hudson evidence is speaking to, or not even necessarily that it's only that, because I understand there's a much larger framing of issue being made. I think that it kind of indicates that the alternative, this would be more true to the status quo, or if they didn't create an alternative, that the alternative is kind of able to literally vibrate beyond those calamities or frustrations. I think that makes then anti-black is not like a prescriptive ontological notion of how violence constitutes black bodies, but rather a descriptive understanding of how racial violence exists and across black bodies, and not necessarily only with the black bodies, which I think gives them leeway to an alt solvency argument, indicating that they're able to solve racialized bodies, which seems to be not only, if not major, pretty sizable portion of the affirmative offense, indicating that the kind of particularities within racial construction is something that they might exclude. Seems like they don't, and as per their explanation of solves the argument. I think the debate perm theory argument is because I think we also spend a very sizable amount of the 2AR on it. I think it becomes a much harder debate to vote neg on, and I spent a lot of time on this argument. The reason why I conclude out is, or neg, is my first inclination is to reject this entire debate, or the perm debate, because it's mostly offense in both directions and not really a substantive defensive argument. I do think you kind of get to one, and I'll explain that in a second. There's not like a defensive delineation that helps me air app or neg definitively. I think the card that you're referencing, which I believe is the right evidence, but I might be wrong, I can double check, says that the being constructed argument is not a negation of the aforementioned A argument, but rather a reformulation and transformation of that aforementioned A argument, which sounds like a reason to prefer the 1NC as the transformation and reformulation of the aforementioned 1AC. And I think that aside, I think the 2NR makes this distinction plausible in terms of how I understand the alt solvency arguments, i.e. I don't think you win much of a risk of real binary impact, and I think because of the general frustration, I'm leaning towards rejecting the theoretical perm argument as a whole. I think this is kind of because the binary or distinction seems to be more of a semantic one, i.e. you have, in voting for the neg, you vote against the app, and if I vote against the app, for the app, I'm voting against neg. What is affirmation? What is becoming? And I think like a more warranted explanation on really either side would help make this a cleaner cut argument to vote on. I think the reason why I don't look to it is I think Bowman indicates earlier that there are semantic binaries, i.e. biological literal distinctions between human and non-human animal that aren't necessarily violent, that if we understand them. So I think I just aired neg on the question that voting neg, if the alt does solve the app, is just a semantic distinction in terms that I'm not voting against the app, but an affirmation ink to ink distinction of like they said Sardania is this, it's not, and even if it is, here's our offense, defense. And in 2AR, I'm just like not quite getting it. I think you're going for a lot of embedded defense based off of like thesis claims, which are like close, but like maybe no cigar consistent, considering that it's your evidence. Sardania is the one into evidence. Yeah. I just think that their reinterpretation allows for me to make a link distinction, or at least prefer a mutual exclusivity, i.e., your evidence indicates that the alt might be a good idea. And I think the some of the not necessarily semantic, but like lesser arguments you go that are still offensive and allow you to kind of like really package on the 2 and R into 2AR are kind of like where you start saying that blackness. Their understanding that blackness can never become human because it is always human is important in understanding how becoming operates. I don't think that 2 and R disagrees with this. Like your next argument is that faciality means we solve the idea that blackness is different than the non-blackness of like faciality, flesh being a set of non-identity, it being fungible and accessible to the modern regime for abuse and targeting and stuff. I think parts of that are new-ish, but even if that's not the case, I think like the 2 and R kind of like says like, yeah, like our argument is not that black people are necessarily non-human, but that, or inhuman, but that flesh is able to move to a space that is fundamentally non-human. Lastly, I don't really have an answer to the resentiment dissent in the 2R. I think there are arguments around or to it, but I think this also helps create a separate offensive reason to vote Nick. And I think at first, because I do think you do some work in terms of leveraging resentment against the neg. I think at best it's a wash that the arguments I have are Suo's identity is constructed through politics of opposition and violence that formulates that identity as such. And then your argument against them is their construction of blackness and racial violence is a reactive form of understanding racial identity to history. But I don't know how your explanation doesn't link to that aforementioned historical claim. So like if your argument is that history or creating racial identity in reaction to history is worse than negative parts of racialized subjectivity, then why doesn't that not also link to you when Brad is talking about the 1AC at like about how like life, you know, might be good but kind of sucks in terms of how you experience racial violence in this space and larger political spaces. I also think the warranting of the resentment argument in the 2 and R is a little better than the 2AR. And I think this just becomes kind of a benefit to default in terms of how I vote. But that's more or less it. People got things to say.
So since y'all won and I voted for y'all, I'm gonna be a little bit harder on y'all first. I thought y'all had basically no answer to their vibrational explanation for how blackness operates. I think the only reason I ended up voting for y'all was because of cross-ex of the 2 and C whenever you got them to basically kind of make some more Wildersonian style arguments. Like, yes, this is because of the middle passage and because of that sort of history. And you even, you did like the question trick. So this is like a metaphysical explanation, I didn't do right? And they were kind of like, yeah, I guess so. So what I ultimately think you ended up doing was defending stuff that you didn't need to defend in the cross-ex. And I think that damaged your ability to insulate your new style argument from some of their old arguments that shouldn't have applied, I think. And the way that I specifically think that played out is I basically just vote because I fight the same thing. I view it like the neg is trying to fight anti-blackness, and that the app is trying to fight multiple intersectional forms of oppression of identities. The neg is fighting oppression of positionalities, the app is fighting oppression of identities. Now, I had to kind of decide, I guess, who solves which one better. And I think the neg ends up winning a resentment dissent for me, and I agree with Alex, I don't really think you have an answer for the resentment dissent in the 2AR, but I ultimately just think when the neg asks you those questions like, why are you correct? I think about those like very basic and methodologically, like is this an empirical observation or are you using logic?
Because I'm confused. So the app whole shit is about how Suo is constructed in a certain way, which is problematic in relation to the black-white binary. Why is saying that, sure, slavery is a thing that happened in relation to black people, not the same goddamn thing?
What do you mean?
The cross-sex of the 2 and C is like, yes, slavery is a thing.
That's not all you said.
He was like, is it metaphysical? Is it this? Is it that? Is it that? It's like, it's all of that. That's the process of becoming flesh.
Right, I think that's the link, because you said that.
Okay, RJ. All
I
right.
think that the AF has an explanation of why their understanding of oppression makes sense. They're like, identity is interrelational. You can't understand one form of identity without explaining other forms of identity, which suggests to me that multiplicity is a better way of understanding and approaching their impact arguments. I don't think you have an explanation at any point of why you're just correct about your argument. Like, is it because of
We're talking about
empirical?
our evidence is specific to them. Their evidence is not specific. Our evidence is literally like the flesh is not contingent.
And what if you're wrong? Like, why are you right about that?
What does that mean? What if they're wrong? What if they don't make an argument that answers the fundamental thesis of the criticism?
I think you have to win that your theory is right for me to buy any of your claims against
Our
their
theory is not contested, RJ.
Yes, it is.
They're like, blackness is ontological. We're like, no, it's not. It's always in a state of becoming the black hole.
And
They're
I think
like,
if you had only
they're like,
gone with
hey,
that, you would have won.
they're like,
Had you
hey,
cross-sexed
no,
the
it's
2C,
not.
you were
They're
treated
like,
for
hey,
that.
no, it's not. Blackness is contingent. We're like, hey, remember when we said it wasn't? Remember when all of our evidence already assumes all of your shit, but none of your evidence speaks to anything that we have said in the debate, RJ? What
Except
piece
for
of evidence
cross-sex
do you
of
think
the
speaks to
2C.
anything that we said in the debate?
The whole fact that you're retreating into what your evidence says is exactly what I'm saying, which is if you had just insulated yourself into your vibrational ontology
So you
argument.
think they're saying slavery is a thing that has marked black people? Okay.
No, because you said that's the justification for why your argument is correct.
That's
is
not
because of
true.
history.
I said slavery was a thing that rendered black fungible in flesh. There are also other things. That was cross-sex. That was a whole. That was his whole. Whatever. I'm not going to fit and argue with you about cross-sex, about your ballot on the cross-sex. That's not what I'm about to do.
Okay. Well, if there was a disjunct between how I understood the argument versus what you thought you were saying, then I don't really feel all that bad about that. That's what I took away from that. So since I thought the AF kind of won a better, more nuanced explanation for why their description of oppression is correct, that's ultimately why I voted F. I could explain how that filters out all the rest of the arguments, but I don't really think.
So how did, no, I actually want you to, because there were other arguments in the debate. How did you answer the no answer to the Saldana stuff?
What argument?
The Saldana shit that we went for about their form of mobile becoming is problematic in relation to the whole goddamn debate.
Well, the whole goddamn thing implies that y'all are both talking about the same form of oppression, and like I said before, I don't think you are. I think you are trying to address a negative relationship to positionalities, and they're trying to address oppression in the form of identity.
So what do you think their answer to the Saldana stuff is? About how their form of mobile becoming is problematic?
It's problematic with regard to your impacts. It does not turn the act.
No, it's
That is a
problematic
link.
in regards to the AF's impacts, because we cut their offer.
Why do you think that's
the
true?
opposite way? It was a whole debate. Why do you not think that it's true? I'm asking you, why do you not think
You're making the claim, so you have the burden of
what I
proof for
did is I
explaining why
made
that's
an
true.
argument in the debate and do not think that the argument was responded to, which is why I'm asking you, what do you think the response to the argument is? Oh,
Tell me
what do you
more.
think the argument is? Because you were flowing and you were judging. I was debating.
What argument?
Okay, we can move on.
Okay. So if you'd like me to explain the specific arguments, I mean, I thought that the neg one sort of like the tying identity to the face link. I think that means that you don't understand blackness as sound or vibrational. That kind of argument, that sort of faciality link. So the F sort of humanizes blackness in that regard. But I think since I don't think the neg wins, that blackness as vibration is an accurate description of how that positionality operates, then I don't think there's an impact to that link argument. I think I think you pointed out that the neg is sort of contradictory in their explanations of things, and I think the cross-sex makes that very apparent. And I think you need to do a little bit more with that. I think you need tell me what I need to do if I think the neg is contradictory. Ultimately, it worked out in your favor because I just sort of said, fine, the neg has to defend all the things that they said. I'm not going to resolve those for them. But I think you could have very easily been like, because they're contradictory, this is just like, they don't have a thesis argument. Don't do any work for them and make deductive applications of their theory arguments if their arguments are inconsistent. Ultimately for the permutation, I didn't really think that you had, actually I thought the 2 and R had an argument that I don't think y'all answered at all, which is that your notion of, basically they said that your understanding of how competition operates reinforces a dialectic of negativity. And then I think the F sort of one that y'all's understanding of competitiveness sort of staticizes the F and doesn't allow them to become. I think that both of those arguments just kind of wash and annihilate each other. So I don't really think the PERN really does anything. I also don't think the PERN accesses like their performance of sound or anything like that, which I think is what the alt is trying to do. So I just don't think the PERN solves in that regard. Yeah, I think that's sufficient for me.
Okay. I've had a lot of trouble resolving this debate, to be perfectly honest. A lot of this went a bit over my head in terms of the high theory nature of what's going on here. I'm not very familiar with a lot of the literature that's going on. And I think some of the explanations, it would behoove for me to be more grounded in sort of the material or what it means for people experiencing and engaging inside of the world, less in the realm of the theoretical. I think this is especially true in the context of impact arguments that both teams are going for. They're largely sort of abstract for the most part, except for like violence is produced, like how does that happen when going about inside of the world, what scenarios for that sort of occur. First thing I sort of looked at is this kind of pick argument, and I had kind of trouble resolving how this pick kind of functions given the alternate sort of explanation for competition. In my mind, it seems odd that if things can't be, if there's mutually exclusive methodologies, then a pick is a taking of the methodology, removing a minor portion of it, and then taking the totality of it. Those seem inconsistent to me and difficult to resolve. I also think that this can be dealt with, though, with a larger sort of explanation of it. I think it's a little bit undercovered and a possible viable method. I think that inside of the 1AR, that Harvard does not concede that they do not gain access to a permutation. I think they make the argument in regards to becoming and the shift that occurs, which is a theoretical justification, not a theory argument about the methodology and the way in which we engage inside the debate.
Okay, I just have a quick question about the perm. So the 2AC
Sure.
is like, we should get a perm, no mutual exclusivity.
Yep.
That's the link argument. Is that their attempt to...
I think the 1AR involved this is what I'm saying.
But no, the 1AR just changed it. That doesn't make the argument go away.
There's a lot more than there's no mutual exclusivity in the 2AC on the permutation.
That's the justification for why they get the permutation. That is the articulation. This Jason, no, this ABC shit did not come into the 1AR. That was not in the 2AC.
They said we should become together, we need to hybrid identities.
It was not in the 2AC. So you think this transition from A, B to C to back to A was in the 2AC?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, definitely.
Definitively in the 2AC.
Yeah.
Absolutely in the 2AC. I'd go to the tape.
Alright.
Yes.
Okay.
I guess I'll get back to what I was saying. So I think that they do have sort of an explanation on the permutation. I think that your characterization of why they don't gain the perm doesn't address that, and is still that sort of base methodology means no permutation is viable, should you gain access to it, which is persuasive to me in some sense, but I don't think it deals with sort of the theoretical portion of it. I think that you should, to be able to resolve that, is to make a linked argument about that sort of mobility that that vision of the permutation implies and why that is problematic in order to deal with this argument so that they can get out of it. Now, it's a little difficult for me to articulate why I think that the permutation is able to resolve like the larger state of the impact of the negative. I think it resolves some of it. I don't think it resolves 100% by any means.
What parts does it resolve?
I think it resolves, well, the first is, well, give me 1 second to look back on my report, to be perfectly honest with you. I think it resolves the negative orientation towards identity and the way in which we posit it. It enables a form of fluidity for white subjects and those that are characterized in between those that are white and black. The evidence they're reading about Asian identity is actually pretty good, that says that Asian identity gets commodified into the notion of the white subject, which produces violence there. So I think that has a net benefit to the permutation, which you have isolated also as a disadd to what they're doing.
Okay, so go back to this discussion of hybridity. What do you think the answer to the Saldana stuff is? Which is that therefore...
Sorry, I can't really hear you.
Go back to this shit about hybridity. So you say that that's a net benefit to the permutation because Bowman is able to become whatever the fuck he
No,
wants.
not Bowman.
Or, yeah, but you said white people, so.
Well, yeah, because the evidence says that Asian identity becomes commodified into white identity.
Okay, sure. Shit like eat, pray, love results in shit like dining at a fucking Indian restaurant or checking in at
you mean
people's house.
the means by which white
dinner
people
references.
commodify other cultures and use it to absolve themselves
A
of
little bit more
violence?
than a commodification.
Well, it's
I
not
think your
commodification.
explanation was very clear on that argument. I literally wrote down like eat, pray, love.
I mean-
That's not a full argument. And I had like white people
Keegan,
in
what do you
Indian
think his
restaurants. Like,
response was?
it wasn't complete.
To me, is not the best way to impact out this argument. I think a better example of this would be the commodification.
That's
or-
what their app author says. That is the impact that the portion that they do.
Right, I'm saying that you can make a stronger impact argument that outweighs that. Yes, their author may say that, but you can use the example of people like fucking A.B. Azalea and others who commodify identity in a very serious way in forms of mobility that does more violence.
It's the same thing. It's just in the context of what the app is.
Now, I get that, but you're limiting yourself too much, I feel like, to what the evidence had said when you can impact turn it in a stronger way.
Limiting
but it's
down
more
to what
twisted.
their author says is what their app results in. Their author is literally like their form of hybridity leads to shit like eat, pray, love. Leads to shit like dining at Indian restaurants. Okay.
Sure, I mean, it's like white people dine at Indian restaurants, and that's,
Yes, their author
Bad?
says that's bad. The author terms the end.
honestly, I don't know, like, sort of like terminal or big impact to that. You were right that they may identify it as bad, but what about it is that is so problematic as a
Sure.
reason to reject the means by which
Sure,
violence
so you
is
don't
determined.
think that reading that author that says your author turns your app is a terminal impact, whatever that means in the world of your author turns the app. What do you think is their answer to it is? TNC or
I think their answer to that is that without that, we have a serious form of violence against identities that don't fall into the category of simple black, white, and that they get all commodified into the level of whiteness, which produces
yes,
violence
and their
against
author
them.
says that form of hybridity is inevitable in the world of the app. Is that folding in process is what the app results in.
How is that not inevitable as a result of the pick two? Because you literally
Well, I'm not
say,
talking
you
about
pick-
Jason. I'm not
you
talking
don't
about
have-
in
one
terms of
second,
the data. I'm
okay.
also talking to Keegan.
You say that you are only an expression of the way that faciality ought to work for black people, right?
No, we are not a discussion of faciality at all, because faciality is disarticulated at the level of the flesh, which is about argument.
My interpretation-
A change in the way that faciality works
Not a
to
change.
make it
Not-
flesh,
it's
to
not
make
a
it
change.
flesh based. Or
It's
what?
not a
Are you
change.
is your alt for black bodies exclusive?
That's also not my question. My question is.
If it is, then the pick includes the parts of the app that you think are bad. Yes,
Now,
which is the problem.
to answer your, sort of posturing to me about the concern with their evidence, isolating a problematic scenario by which white people commodify, well, maybe not commodify is not the best word, I don't know what the fuck I should be using right there, but dining at, Chinese restaurants, whatever the fuck. I think you need to impact this out in a stronger way than just the evidence. The problem I'm having, and I think some of the other judges would agree with this, is that the impact level of this debate is a little shallow on both sides. That this needs to be stronger, well not stronger, it needs to be bigger and more forceful in order to do that. If there was better impact comparison between the negative and the affirmative, I think that very easily I can vote negative in this debate, or vote back in this debate. As it stands, I'm left trying to sort through a variety of link arguments and link differentials without a terminal, well not terminal impact, but an impact that I can really grasp onto.
I still don't know what his answer to the Saldana stuff is outside of hybridity is good when their author says that hybridity is bad.
If you haven't made an impact argument, then you haven't made a complete argument to respond to.
Like saying it's bad is not, yes, lots of shit is bad, but like,
Their author says
What does
it
it do?
results in their
And you
impact.
didn't make a warrant in your speech from the evidence, so I'm not gonna vote on that.
What was their answer is my question.
If you don't have a complete argument, they don't need to answer it. You have to make a complete argument.
like, there's too much of this debate has been focused on simply the link and the access point to the link and internal link arguments without the consequence of it occurring. Your framing of this to us is they say it's bad. Expand beyond that. What is it about it that's bad that produces a unique form of violence that prevents solvency that makes it even worse for individuals and even more beyond that, right?
Sure.
Like, that's viable. And I think you can win the debate on things like that. I think that is wildly underdeveloped inside of this debate. And that it makes it difficult.
So you think it's wildly undeveloped on our side of the debate, but not?
No, I do think it is wildly underdeveloped on the affirmative. I think this is too much of a debate about link questions and access to an internal link argument. I'm not saying that this is like, a sod issue that's only with you all. I think that this debate lacks serious impact out in a way that makes it easy for us to evaluate. I don't think this debate is like 70-30 in favor of Harvard. I think this is like fucking 50-50, and I have trouble trying to resolve those issues.
Okay.
Like, just being straight with you, like, that's all I got.
I think if you're going to win this debate, this would be more focused on the performative aspect of what the alt has done to be able to filter out the permutation. I think the permutation is effective. And I think your best bet is winning off of that. They do have a competitive explanation for how becoming must work for black bodies. I don't think that you won, that explanation is competitive. I think that you failed to establish that the app precludes an understanding of black becoming that is vibrational or sonic. I couldn't possibly explain to the app why I think the app is inconsistent with that explanation. And I think that the rest of your link arguments are premised on, your best link arguments are premised on a theory of anti-blackness that you want to back off of, that they have established is bad. Your Sexton evidence is definitively based off of a historical wound, premised foundationally in slavery, not informed by slavery, not backed up by slavery, but literally foundationally established by
And
slavery.
Saldana
And
says that we
live
cannot
today.
separate ourselves from that trauma, which is another piece of evidence.
And that they have established that believing that both that is foundational and that is exceptional are a bad way of looking at oppression for a variety of other
Jason, that's
people.
not what their author says.
That's
That's not what their author says.
I don't believe that they are inconsistent with your extra additional Saldana evidence. I think the app has always established that there is an excess of understanding for oppression in everybody. In each body, there is something unique and exceptional about oppression. And I believe that is different than what you think they are as hybridity and consistent with your reading of that Saldana evidence.
Two things. First, how do they win?
They have won because
I
they.
didn't even answer.
Oh, sorry.
How do they win that the alt is trapped in historical trauma of slavery? First, when Saldana says that we need to not distance ourselves or disavow that historical trauma. The second is the Sexton evidence says that yes, slavery was a goddamn thing, but also cites people like Deleuze in terms of how we work through that process, which is the process of becoming flesh, which is diving into the black hole.
I think that both that James and Sexton disagree with one another. I don't
That's
think that
not true.
I don't think that evidence is consistent. No. And I think that tension gets to the heart of why there is a great degree of tension in my mind.
Sexton is literally like we can work through that. Here goes the
Agreed.
Deleuze.
Your alt is different than that. Your alt is not inconsistent with the app. It is not, does not preclude the app. There's not a reason why we cannot view identity or positionality for other bodies in one way and positionality or understanding of the black body in particular. And that everyone has particularity. I don't understand why your explanation believes there's no particularity for other folks. But I do believe that erasure of the particularity for non-black bodies is disadvantageous. Your belief that the black body is the only body.
It's not the black body. Would you keep talking
and if it is
about
not just
the blackness?
And if it's not just
Let's
blackness that possesses particularity, then the app
What is
is
blackness?
advantageous.
Jason, what is blackness? From the context of this debate, what is blackness? Because I can tell you what it's not. It's not the black body. So
Blackness is a sonic, vibrational understanding. It's a becoming that is a relation both to history, to the social world, to cultural experience.
How is that the app?
How is that inconsistent with you?
That's
You
not
need
my
a
question.
link.
That's not my question.
You need a link.
How is that the app?
You must have a.
You know how debate works.
You do
How
not
is that
have
the
a
app?
link.
How is that the app?
The app does not preclude that.
How
You
is
must
that-
have a link.
How is that the app?
It is the permutation. You must have a link. I cannot go against the app because they are not everything.
It's not that they're not everything, it's that they
You voted
activate.
because there's too many